Good morning, dear guests. Good afternoon for those of you who are based in Asia, and possibly very early morning for those of you who are across the Atlantic. This is our second webinar from Asia Center this week, and we are delighted to host Jiangmin Hua, whom Clément will introduce later. Clément Durif, whom we had the pleasure to introduce last Monday and who is joining us now as a junior researcher within the frame of our Horizon program. We run this session and he will introduce Jiangmin Hua right now. Thank you very much for joining. We are on for 1 hour. However, if some of you want to stay on for longer time, we will still be there and we will accommodate questions even after 12 o'clock Paris time. As you can see, Clément followed our Ministry of Finance instructions. He has a turtleneck because it's very cold in Paris, and we are very cautious about saving energy, as was told to us last Monday. But today is another topic, is semiconductor. So Clément, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Jean-François. Thank you very much for your introduction and for your kind words. Good morning, Minhua. We are very happy to have you here today with us. And I'm very happy to take part into this web conference about the global industry of semiconductors. So maybe before getting to the substance of the webinar, let me introduce yourself a little bit more in detail about your academic background, about your work background. You are an international political economist, specialized in East Asian geopolitical and economic matters, with a special emphasis on Taiwan, if I'm not mistaken. After graduating from the University of Leuven in Belgium, you obtained both a master's in international economic policy and a PhD in economic sciences from the University of Grenoble in France. So you started working in Taipei, working as a research fellow in various trade and economic research institutes in Taiwan. And you then spent around 10 years in the National University of Singapore, right?
Yeah, around 10 years.
Okay,
yeah.
And it is during these years that you've made the major part of your work and publications, so peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and maybe more importantly, 3 single-authored books, notably about the cross-strait relation between China and Taiwan, and on the South Korean economy as well. So you're now working for the Heritage Foundation at the Asian Studies Center that you're representing today. And yes, we are again very happy to have you here. Did I get this little summary right?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's perfect. Okay, a couple of last comments before we get properly started. So this is Chatham House rule, of course. You know the rules. Minhua will present for about 40 minutes. You can ask a question in the chat. I will be happy to relay them to Minhua a little bit later on. Minhua, the floor is yours. Maybe you can share your slides. So if this oh, the host is, can you allow Minhua to share? Should be on right now.
I guess everyone can see my slide right now. Okay. So thank you, Clément, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to have this opportunity to come to Paris and share with you my understanding about the semiconductor industry. And I would also like to share to thank Professor Jean-François and Asia Center in Paris for the kind invitation. So to begin with, I would like to use a few slides to let you know that what happened in the semiconductor industry. And also I would like to let you know that this is still an ongoing research project. We know that over the past few years, many things have happened in this industry due to the pandemic crisis. And the debate is still going on. How can we do the best for the development of the semiconductor industry in the future? So today, my presentation will be more informative. I'm not going to do any policy recommendations. I will not have any prejudgment or prediction for the future development. Instead, I would like to invite all of you here today to think through about this semiconductor industry. And we can, I hope also to hear more your thoughts and feedback in the end of my presentation. So first of all, as you can see from this slide, this is a simplified global division of labor in the semiconductor industry today. So basically we see that US, Europe, and Japan, they are 18 as the main providers for the semiconductor equipment, and most of the manufacturing production conducted in Asia, especially in China. Asia is also a major manufacturing hub for many industrial manufactured goods. So those chips, they are circulating between Asian countries and assembled into the final consumption goods. And those final consumption goods are exported to the global market. The United States and Europe is the largest consumption. These two are the largest consumption markets in the world right now. So this global division of labor is not only limited in the semiconductor industry, but it also shows that the basic economic structure of the global economy today. In many industries, we can find a similar division of labor like this one. So this model has been working for many decades. There are some problems, there are some deficiencies in this model, but no one or most of the governments, they don't really try to correct this model until in the past few years, in the last couple of years when the pandemic hit the global economy. So many governments today, they are trying to correct this global division of labor because of the disruption of the supply chain network, because China's ambition to dominate the semiconductor industry, to try to be the technology provider, the US-China geopolitical competition, tension, and so on. So the model that we are used to in the past few decades, that based on the production efficiency, nowadays this production efficiency is de-emphasized. Instead, the national interest, the national security is highlighted in our global economy. So, this on the left-hand side, we see that in the past, the global economy was running based on the market-driven, the so-called market-driven economic development integration. It's based on each country's comparative advantage. This model led greater economic development, also technology innovation. But today, the model is changing. The policies are leading the model, the global economic structure, changing towards the so-called techno-nationalism. So this is the term invented by Alex Capri 2 years ago. So basically, the definition for this model is that this is this techno-nationalism means that the trade and the technology policy today, they are linked to the national security, social stability, and the economic prosperity of a nation, and the government's intervention in the market so as to protect the domestic business from being influenced by another country which is not friendly to the country. But this model, we don't know how. It is still it's still changing, it's still developing. We don't know how this model will lead us to in the future. So there is a big question mark here. And a possible scenario is that we probably will have more than one manufacturing hub, not only in Asia, maybe in the United States, in Europe, and so on, because many governments, they try to relocate, they try to attract manufacturing chips fabrication back to their home territories. They don't feel secure to rely on Asia to produce the chips and most of the manufactured goods today. So as mentioned, there are many questions, there are uncertainties for this new model to be developed in the future. We don't know whether this new model will lead us to a better future or not. So well, I will continue my presentation in the next 20 to 30 minutes. I would like to invite you to think through the questions such as, are there possible other scenarios in the future, or how can we better address the current challenges, or will this model lead us to a better world, or are there going to be more challenges in the future based on the new model? So I forgot to mention in the beginning that the old model based on the global division of labor that led many Asian countries to get out of the poverty, to develop the economies. But on the other hand, the non-qualified laborers in the developed countries, they suffered from the competition, from the relocation of investment to other developing countries. So there are certainly some problems of this global division of labor based on each country's comparative advantage. But the question is, can we find a better way of better economic network in the world? So here is my presentation outline. I will first of all introduce what is semiconductor and what is important, and later on I will try to point out some specific features in this industry today, and then I will conclude some thoughts in the end. So what is semiconductor industry? Basically, this is the you can see this from the word that it is a material between conductor and the insulator. And it has strong data storage and communication capabilities that enabled many industrial activities, including mobile phones, gaming system, aircraft, or even the military equipment, all rely on these small chips. So it affects almost our everyday life, and is not only important in the current industrial technology, but also for the future. So the nickname for the semiconductor chips is the new oil. And this figure shows the semiconductor sales over the past few decades. So as we can see from this figure, despite some slump during the crisis period, overall, we can see that semiconductor chip sales demonstrate a very strong, steady growth over the past 3 decades, especially in the last 2 years due to the pandemic crisis. The demand for the long-term telecommunication equipment grow even stronger, so the demand for the chips are stronger as a result. Most of the sales of semiconductor chips is going to the ICT products, such as smartphone, computers, tablet, and so on. Asia Pacific region dominates the sales of semiconductor chips. As mentioned, that in this region, Asia dominates most of the manufacturing production in the world. So the demand for the semiconductor chips is much stronger in this region for manufacturing purpose. So how the global semiconductor industry was developed to what we witness today. In the past few decades, the development of globalization, such as the liberalization in trade and investments, is a very important driver. So for example, the International Technology Agreement in 1996 drove the tariff for the electronic products for the IT product to almost zero. Currently, there are 97 countries under the ITA, and almost about 97% of the IT products. Now they are circulating without any tariff between the ITM members. And in terms of the investment liberalization, China's FDI promotion policy plays a very important role. The Chinese government's policy since the 1990s started to direct the FDI towards technology and more capital-intensive industries, including the semiconductor industry. So that attracted a lot of FDI in this industry. So here is the production in the semiconductor industry. We can basically divide into 3 phases, including the initial design to the final packaging and the testing. So basically the US companies dominate the design part and the Taiwanese companies dominate the manufacturing parts of the in this semiconductor industry. There are companies such as Intel and Samsung. They have from design to manufacturing to packaging. They incorporate all the production phases. Also, they are called integrated device manufacturers. There are companies in Europe and the USA. They are dominating in manufacturing equipment material supply. So after decades of investment relocation and the development in this industry, the top 10 companies in semiconductor industry has dramatic change. The Japanese companies, they were dominating in the semiconductor industry in the 1980s, but the top 10 the Japanese companies on the top 10 list shrank from 6 to 0 today. Instead, the companies headquartered in the United States increased from 3 to 6. What is more worth noticing is the companies from South Korea and Taiwan, they have been emerging over the last 2 decades. So although Chinese government has been promoting the development of semiconductor industry over the last decade, so far, none of the Chinese companies is on the top 10 list. So what happened to China's semiconductor industry? So as mentioned previously, China has been promoting FDI in this industry. So we can see on the figure, on the left-hand side figure, the FDI in China's electronic and telecom equipment has increased quite significantly in the early 2000s, but stagnant after, and then started to decline after 2011. In the last 2 years, we see a rebound of the FDI in this industry. Overall, we see that actually the FDI in China's electronic and the telecom equipment in China's total FDI declined over the last decade. Mainly because China's economic structure towards more consumption-based economy. And on the other hand, we also see that on the line here, the electronic and telecom equipment accounted a significant share in total FDI in manufacturing. So that means the FDI in China is more and more towards the electronic industry. Although overall, the FDI in manufacturing in China is not as significant as FDI in services industry. So as a result of those FDI, China has become a very important trader in IC. China in 2020, China and Hong Kong, they are the leading importer and exporter in IC. And here, Hong Kong's role is more like a transit center rather than a manufacturing production place. So here is to show you the ICT products, trade in ICT product. So China exported a lot of ICT goods. So those ICT goods such as smartphone, computer, and so on. China demands a lot of chips, whether produced in China or imported from other countries. In order to make those final consumption goods, and then exported to other countries, exported mainly to European Union and the United States. As we can see that these two places accounted for most of the import of the ICT goods. So how did China make itself such an important player in the global supply chain network? This can trace back to the end of 1970s, when China started to open up its economy after the US-China reconciliation. Through the FDI, through the opening up policy, China gradually integrated itself into the supply chain network. In recent years, over the last 1 to 2 decades, we also witnessed that China is very actively engaging in all kinds of bilateral and multilateral FTA. China is also promoting Belt and Road initiatives. One of the aims is to shift the labor-intensive production out of China to other developing countries, and so that China can concentrate on developing the high value added production in China. So in terms of the domestic policy, China lifted the wage, and also through the industrial policy such as Made in China 2025, all these aim to lift the level of its technology to climb in the supply chain network. Despite China's efforts in the past decades, China's reliance on the chips produced in foreign countries is still very high. So Chinese semiconductor companies only accounted for about 6% of total IC sold in the country. So in other words, over 90% of the chips produced in China is actually produced by the foreign companies. And we can also take a look at the trade balance in IC and electronic component. China run a tremendous trade deficit in IC. So that means the demand for IC is much stronger than it export to other countries. On the other hand, we also see that Taiwan runs the most of the trade surplus in IC and electronic components. So basically the high-end production and R&D are basically dominated by companies in the United States, Taiwan, and South Korea. This figure is a bit complicated, so I will try to simplify it. So on this colorful photo, we see, as mentioned previously, the semiconductor production can be divided into different phases. And so in this EDA and core IP, EDA refers to electronic design automation. So basically, this is to produce the tool for for manufacturing, fabricating the IC. So the US is the blue color. They dominate these parts, and together with logic production, this phase of production has the highest value added. On the contrary, the final one, 6% of value added, is dominated by China, but these parts like assembly, packaging, and testing only accounted for 6% of total value added, the least in the whole semiconductor production, and China play an important role in this phase. So here the figure is to show you the top spender on research and development. So we can see that the US companies and Taiwanese, South Korean companies, they are the top 10 spenders in R&D. So these companies, as we can see in the previous slides, those companies, they are also the top 10 companies in terms of the semiconductor chip sales. So that means those companies, by relocating their investment, their fabrication to developing countries, that allow those companies to make tremendous profit. So they are able to invest in R&D mostly in their own home countries. And in China's case, Chinese companies have been making effort through China's Chinese government's subsidies, but their Chinese companies spend expenditure on R&D are not as much as those companies in the United States, Taiwan, and South Korea. Most of the R&D is financed by the Chinese companies. So these are two different models in China and other countries. In recent years, Taiwan has become a spotlight in the semiconductor industry, mainly because China's military ambition towards Taiwan, and most of the advanced chips in the world nowadays is produced in Taiwan right now. So because of Taiwan's importance in the semiconductor industry, so nowadays the China's reunification policy is no longer restrained in its political ambition. Is no longer for China's political purpose. There are the other reasons, such as to take over Taiwan in order to help China to upgrade its level of technology in the semiconductor industry and then play a more dominant role in this important industry. So here the figures show you over 90% of the most advanced chips is produced in Taiwan nowadays. So as you can see in the first figure, the less than 10 nanometers, the less number, that means the more advanced of the chips. And another 8% of the chips less than 10 nanometers is produced by South Korea. So TSMC dominates the global foundry business. And if we add the other Taiwanese companies, so in total, Taiwan accounted for almost 60% of the global foundry business. And TSMC alone accounted for 56%. And most of the chips produced by TSMC is for the making the smartphones. So today, the global smartphones, 70% of the global smartphones, they use the chips produced by TSMC. Another 30% is produced, another 30% of chips is produced by Samsung. TSMC is very important, as we also see in the past 2 years, the chip shortage in the car industry. TSMC also make chips for the military equipment in the United States. And TSMC's success draw the attention from other companies to join this business. So how can we explain TSMC's success? There are many factors, so I only want to highlight 2 important factors. One important internal factor is that TSMC does not compete with their customers. So this is different from Samsung. Samsung makes everything, but TSMC only makes chips. So between TSMC and Apple, there's no competition. Sorry. There is a clear division of labor between TSMC and Apple. Apple makes the final branded product and TSMC supply the chips, whereas in Samsung's case, Samsung produces chips, Samsung produces the branded products in direct competition with Apple. So Apple cannot trust Samsung, the business rival, to provide them the chips. Another important external factor is that in the United States, there are many semiconductor companies. They are founded by the Taiwanese. So for example, the CEO of AMD and NVIDIA, they are both Taiwanese Americans. And those 2 companies, they accounted for 15% of TSMC's total semiconductor sales after Apple. The geopolitical tension, the impact from the geopolitical tension on TSMC is restrained so far. As we can see, the sales revenue of TSMC continue to grow over the past few years, but the share, China's share in TSMC's total revenue declined from from 22% in the third quarter of 2020 to 13% in the second quarter this year. So despite the loss of Huawei customer, the sale, it doesn't really affect TSMC's sales. The demand from other countries, from other companies is still very strong. Because of TSMC's success, because of the many governments right nowadays, they want to take part in this in this semiconductor chip fabrication. So many countries, they invited TSMC to invest in their home countries. In the past, the overseas investment only accounted for about 10% of TSMC's total production. 90% of TSMC's chips fabrication is in Taiwan. So after those expanding investment, overseas investment, so far we don't see that there will be any significant change, because TSMC invested in Japan, in the United States, but overall, the TSMC's investment in Taiwan is still much greater than its overseas investment. TSMC continue to expand the production site from the middle part of Taiwan to southern part of Taiwan. So in the next few years, TSMC announced that they will invest 120 billion in Taiwan, which is much greater than their investment in Japan and the United States. Not only this world is dangerously relying on Taiwan, but Taiwan is also heavily relying on TSMC. So on the left-hand side figure, we can see that the electronic part manufacturing as percentage of Taiwan GDP increased from 31% to 41%. And TSMC played a very important part for this growing share of electronic part manufacturing in Taiwan's GDP. On the right-hand side figure, we also see that the electronic components, the export of electronic components as percentage of total export in different countries. So Taiwan has 40%. This is much higher than other major manufacturing economies such as Singapore, Malaysia, or even China. So Taiwan's economy is very much relying on producing chips, especially the chips produced by TSMC. So in recent years, as there are many concerns for the national security, for the national interest, many governments, they started to encourage the semiconductor chip fabrication in their home countries. And this will lead to some problems, such as, is it going to lead towards state competition in subsidizing the semiconductor industry? It is going to have the oversupply of chip production in the future. And also, does that mean the end of Taiwan's dominance in advanced chip fabrication? Maybe not immediately, because it takes time for building all these chip fabrication plant, but in the next 10, 20 years, it might be the case. And also, China is a main target for many democratic countries right now, but from these semiconductor policies, we don't see that they are targeting at China. Instead, it's more like they are hurting each other. They all want to take part in this semiconductor production. So this is another picture to show you China was in this global supply chain network. It is still in this supply chain network in the semiconductor industry. But in recent years, the United States set a lot of restrictions to prevent technology transfer to China. And China's response so far is to increase the usage of chips made by the domestic companies so as to support their domestic semiconductor companies. At the same time, China continues to attract FDI in this industry. So there is a question about the potential decoupling of China from this global supply chain network. If that really happened, I think China may suffer more because it will make China more difficult to develop top companies in the semiconductor industry. China, the companies in South Korea, in Taiwan, they are able to find their market, their role in the global supply chain network because of the partnership with other countries. So it will be very difficult for China to have to develop the companies like TSMC or ASML in Holland or Samsung in South Korea if China is not within this global supply chain network. So finally, the concluding remarks. So here is another figure to show you that this is the original global division of labor. We have United States, Europe, and Japan as the main core technology provider, and then Taiwan and South Korea in the second place, and then China is mainly responsible for the low value added production. But nowadays, the global economy has become increasingly unstable because China doesn't want to stay in the place as the final assembler, and China want to jump to the second and even the first place. United States and countries in Europe, they also want to take part in the high value added production. So the world has become less stable than before because each one they want to jump to the other part of the global economic structure. So the semiconductor industry is no longer driven, the development is no longer driven by the pure economic consideration. They are geopolitical considerations, and that the impact of the geopolitical consideration has impacted the supply chain network towards restructuring. And the economic consideration also impacts on the geopolitics, such as nowadays the policy towards Taiwan in EU and the USA has started to change mainly because of Taiwan's significance in the semiconductor industry. So this is my final slide. I would like to conclude that there are deficiencies in the current model based on the comparative advantage in this globalized semiconductor industry. And in the past few decades, those globalized manufacturing production in the semiconductor industry is developed mainly because of the collective effort, not only China, but the overall global trend is towards trade and investment liberalization. So if today we think that this is not a good model, we need to correct it. I think we also need a collective effort to make this model a better one that fits better everyone's benefits. So there's also a consideration between the balance between national security and economic interest. National security is important, but we have also need to consider how to maximize our benefit. How can we continue to encourage companies to continue their investment in R&D and so on. So that's all my presentation today. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your feedback. Thank you.